He took me to court for damages, but the mechanic told everyone what really happened. He walked me around the glossy shoulder of his car, narrating the impact like a tour guide. "See the arc?" he said, tracing the scuff that ran higher toward the door handle. "Classic bumper scrape." I crouched, more to steady myself than to look, and saw the telltale rubber lint along his tire where it met the rim. That happens when you kiss a curb or bottom out, not when someone brushes you at 2 miles per hour. I didn't say it. I was still playing defense, still trying to act like a neighbor, not an adversary. "Let's just exchange info," he said, thrusting his phone into my hands to open notes. The bystanders got their little jolt. Neighbor drama with paperwork. "I'm not admitting fault," I said, putting the phone back in his palm. "Because I didn't hit you." He tilted his head, smile hardening. "Then maybe the court can figure it out, man." By dinner, my phone was pinging with screenshots from our building's group chat. Linda, the unofficial mayor of our street, had posted a photo of Roman's car with a caption that was almost literary. "If this were my car, I'd hope my neighbor would do the right thing." Under that, the chorus began. Yikes, people need to own their mistakes. And the one that made my chest go hot. "He's always quiet." Quiet in that sentence meant suspicious. I typed and erased 3 replies. I have a bad habit of trying to be small when a room turns on me, as if I can make a problem pass by being less visible than it. I set the phone face down and walked out to the parking lot to look at the only fact I could control, my own car. It's not a car that makes anyone gather. A 10-year-old hatchback with a scuffed bumper and a stain on the carpet under the passenger seat that never fully goes away. I backed up until the sun skated across the rear like a searchlight, ran my fingers along every edge, and felt nothing but dust and the one old nick that sits low, below knee height. No fresh paint transfer, no grit embedded into my clear coat, no bright, chalky trace of Roman's pearl white. I measured against my thigh and then against his scuffs in my head. His mark started higher than the top of my bumper. The math of it wouldn't resolve. My car couldn't reach his damage unless my bumper jumped. I took photos anyway, date-stamped, from angles that would make sense later, if there was a later. I taped a piece of painter's tape at the highest point on my bumper and took a picture of it with the height marked on a ruler, so I wouldn't be guessing in a week. I felt ridiculous and oddly steady, the way your hands stop shaking once you start doing anything at all. Back upstairs, I called Jazz because I knew she'd tell me which parts of my panic were useful. "People will believe the first story they hear," she said, calm like always. "So we tell the second story with receipts. Did you check for paint transfer?" I told her no transfer, wrong height, the tire lint on his rim. "That lint," she said, "is from a curb or a hard compression. Sideswipe usually gives you a smear in one direction, not that shredded look. Get photos. Find cameras." We started listing them like a scavenger hunt. The corner bodega with the bulletproof glass, and the camera tilted at the parking lot like a lazy eye. The bus stop where the Route 14 parks in the morning. Some of those buses have dash cams that stay on when they idle. The entrance to our building, which has a door camera that records to a cheap DVR whenever the motion sensor triggers. And sometimes, if you coax it, when nothing obvious moves at all. None of that would prove I didn't hit him, but it might prove what actually happened to his car. Facts are loud if you line them up. Roman didn't wait for that. The next morning, there was an email from a claims coordinator that looked more like a threat than a process. Attached was a neat PDF with a repair estimate just shy of 12 grand, rounded like a number designed to feel both specific and punishing. It said, "Replacement of quarter panel, blending adjacent panel, wheel refinishing, alignment, associated labor," and at the bottom, in small letters that wanted to look official, "Mechanic's statement, damage consistent with impact from another vehicle." The signature was a first name and a phone number that rolled to a voicemail, announcing a cheerful shop jingle. I called and reached a man who told me, "We stand by our assessments," without having heard my name. I printed the estimate and drew lines on it like I was grading a paper. Consistent with impact from another vehicle is not a measurement. It's a mood. If you want to say side impact, you should show directionality, which way the panel bent, where the high point is, where the metal creased from tensile to compressive. The estimate had none of that. Just a list of parts and a big number that would be useful in a settlement conversation where I gave up quickly to make it go away. I took a picture of the estimate next to my bumper for no real reason except that I wanted the absurdity in one frame. Then I opened our chat and typed, deleted, typed again. "For anyone who's curious," I wrote finally, "my car has no new damage or paint transfer. If anyone has video facing the lot last night, please DM me." Linda heart reacted with the kind of heart that reads like a pat on the head. That night, I watched Roman's car as if attention alone could reveal a clue. He had been bragging last weekend in the courtyard, easier to ignore then, about the stance on his car, lower than stock. The kind of pride that sounds like a dare to gravity. Now, standing close in the dusk, I noticed how tight the wheel sat in the arch, how little daylight you could see over the tire. If you hit a deep dip at speed with that setup, the tire will kiss metal, and the metal will lose. I thought of the rubber lint again and took another photo, my camera catching a thin shaving of aluminum on the inner lip. I am not a mechanic, but things tell on themselves if you look kindly and for long enough. Jazz came by with takeout, and that accusing tenderness friends have. "You're letting him live in your head?" she said. But she opened her laptop and started a folder named Roman, with the clean intention of a surgeon. She helped me draft a simple letter. I deny liability. My vehicle shows no corresponding damage. Please preserve all relevant evidence including surveillance, dash cam, shop notes, and communications. Any spoliation will be noted. We sent it certified because paper that arrives with a green card makes people pay attention. Then we sat in the half-dark and listened to the building settle, a sound like distant rain. When the knock finally came, it was small enough that I almost missed it, the polite rapping of someone who wants no part in the drama they deliver. I opened the door, and the hallway smelled like dust and wet umbrellas. There was no one there, just a thin manila envelope tucked under the doormat with my name typed, not handwritten, like a foregone conclusion. Inside, crisp and impersonal, was a summons. Roman versus me, a date circled in red pen because someone at the clerk's office still uses pens for emphasis. My stomach did that slow elevator drop and then bottomed out into a steadiness I hadn't felt in days. If this was going to be theater, then we'd do it with lights on. I put the papers on my kitchen table beside the ruler and the photos and the estimate, and for the first time since he said, "Hey man," I felt the outline of a plan take shape under my hands. The first night after the summons, I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope spread open like it was going to leak some new horror if I looked away. The legalese had that dry sting. Alleged damages, failure to mitigate, liable for repair costs. But what burned most was my own name typed as defendant. I had never even been inside a courtroom except on jury duty, and now here I was being dragged there for something I hadn't done. I almost called Roman to try and work it out, but Jazz stopped me cold. "That's exactly what he wants," she said, tapping her finger against the summons like it was a chess piece. "He thinks if he makes it heavy enough, you'll cave and write a check. Don't. We're going to fight this with facts." So I started my own version of discovery. The next day, I drove to a small, independent mechanic that's been in my neighborhood for years. The place smelled of old oil and hot brake dust, and the guy behind the counter, gray ponytail, hands cracked from decades of solvents, agreed to give my hatchback a once-over. He rolled it onto the lift and studied every inch of the rear bumper with the bored patience of someone who's seen hundreds of neighbors' disputes. Finally, he turned and said, "This car hasn't made contact with anything big in months. That scratch? That's old, and it's lower than the other guy's damage." He handed me a typed note for $50. No evidence of recent collision damage on rear bumper. Scratches inconsistent with reported impact height. It was the first document that felt like a shield instead of a weapon. I scanned the note and sent it straight to Jazz. She texted back a string of clapping emojis followed by, "Now we need timestamps." She meant footage. The bodega camera turned out to be useless. The owner told me it only recorded over itself every 24 hours, and the police had to request it anyway. The buses, same deal. Weeks of paperwork, but the apartment DVR might still have something. I spent an evening scrolling through static smeared video until my eyes hurt. At 11:40 p.m., the night of the incident, the camera caught headlights streaking through the lot, too fast, bouncing like someone hit a dip. The quality was garbage, but you could see the suspension collapse for a beat. Roman's car wasn't even in frame, just a flash of white paint on the far side. Still, it told me something had happened, and it hadn't involved me. Meanwhile, the group chat kept grinding. Linda posted again, this time about community trust. Someone else suggested we chip in if I couldn't afford to pay for damages. Reading it made me sweat with a mixture of anger and shame. These people weren't in the courtroom, but they were building a jury in the court of perception, and right now I was losing. I put my phone down before I could type something sharp. Instead, I added more to the folder Jazz had started. The mechanic's note, the DVR still frames, the photos I'd taken of my car with a ruler taped to the bumper. The folder was growing, even if the world outside thought I was just hiding. A week before the hearing, Roman strutted into the courtyard with a new printout in hand. He waved it like a trophy, and when I got close enough, I saw it was a revised estimate from his shop. This time, the total was even higher, close to 15 grand, with a note that said, "Damage consistent with impact at low speed, left rear quarter panel, caused by another vehicle." He said it loud enough for half the neighbors to hear. "Guess you better bring your checkbook, man." My pulse spiked, but Jazz's voice was in my head. "Stay calm. Document everything." So I just snapped a picture of the paper and walked back inside. That night, Jazz and I zoomed in on the photos until our eyes blurred. She noticed something I hadn't. The damage diagram in his estimate showed force pushing upward, not sideways. "See here?" she said, pointing at the arrow. "That's vertical compression. That doesn't happen from a bumper grazing. That happens when your wheel slams upward into the panel. Like, oh, I don't know, hitting a pothole at 40 with spacers installed. I remembered Roman bragging about lowering his car with cheap parts, and suddenly it clicked. His suspension had eaten itself, and he was trying to make me the scapegoat. I didn't sleep much after that. My mind kept replaying Roman's smirk in the courtyard, the way neighbors nodded like extras in his play. But under the nerves, there was a stubborn thread starting to pull taut. If he wanted a performance, then we'd give him one, only with facts instead of theater. I stacked my folder of evidence on the table, heavier than it had been a week ago. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, the truth could hold its own under lights and oaths. The week leading up to court felt like walking through glue. Everything took longer. Every sound in the building seemed to carry Roman's name in it. He was louder than ever, laughing in the courtyard, revving his car a little too aggressively at night. But underneath the swagger, I could sense a crack. He was pushing harder because he needed the story to stick. I tried to focus on building my own. Jazz came over one evening with her laptop open, and that look she gets when she's on the hunt. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward me. She had found Roman's Instagram posts from a local cars and coffee meetup. Just 3 days before the supposed accident, he had proudly posted photos of his lowered suspension, showing off the cheap spacer kit he'd installed himself. The comments were full of friends hyping him up, "Stance King," and "That slammed, bro." But Jazz zoomed in on the details. "See how the tire is practically kissing the fender? He's one pothole away from shredding metal. This isn't accident damage. This is physics catching up." The more I looked, the angrier I got. He'd been parading around like a victim when he knew exactly why his car looked the way it did. Jazz dug deeper, finding a friend of his tagged in one of the posts. That friend had commented something like, "Bro, remember the bridge dip? I thought your wheel was gonna snap off." My pulse spiked. We screenshotted everything, dated and time-stamped. The pieces were lining up. Still, suspicion isn't proof. Roman had an official-looking estimate on letterhead, and I had screenshots from Instagram. It felt lopsided. Then Jazz said the words that shifted the air. "We can subpoena his mechanic." The idea felt huge, grown up, out of reach. But she explained, because he was taking me to court for damages, any records from the shop that worked on his car were fair game. Notes, invoices, communications. If his story was clean, he had nothing to hide. If it wasn't, well, my stomach fluttered with both hope and dread. A week later, an envelope arrived from the court with the discovery packet. Inside was a copy of the shop's notes, most of it routine, but buried in the middle were lines that made my skin prickle. Customer states, vehicle bottomed out at speed. Inspect for suspension and body damage. Date, 2 days before the night he accused me. Right beneath it was another note. Added later, customer request report worded as side impact, possible insurance claim. I read that line 3 times, then handed it to Jazz like I was afraid it might vanish if I held it too long. She let out a low whistle. There it is. He literally asked them to phrase it as something else. My chest felt tight, like a rubber band finally snapping back. For the first time since this circus started, I felt the ground tilt in my direction. That night, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered to hear a man's voice. Low, gravelly, hesitant. "This is Sergey. I'm the mechanic who worked on Roman's car." I froze. He explained that he had been uneasy about the whole thing from the start. He wanted me to exaggerate the damage, make it sound like collision. I don't like lying in my notes, but he insisted. His words were careful, but there was something in his tone that sounded like regret. "I'll tell the court what really happened if I'm asked. I can't perjure myself for a neighbor's ego." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of my refrigerator. It was the first time this ordeal felt less like a trap and more like a fight I could actually win. Roman had spent weeks puffing his chest in the courtyard, playing to the crowd. But now the truth wasn't just mine anymore. It lived in paperwork, screenshots, and in the conscience of the very mechanic he'd relied on to back his story. The night before the hearing, I opened the folder Jazz had built and flipped through every page. Photos of my clean bumper, the ruler showing the height, screenshots of Roman's lowered car, his bragging captions, the shop notes about bottoming out, and that one perfect sentence, customer request report worded as side impact. I slid it back into the stack and closed the folder with both hands, feeling the weight of it press into my palms. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was carrying proof. And when Roman walked into court with his smirk and his showmanship, he was going to find out that stories don't hold up the same way under oath. Court felt like a theater built for people who never wanted to be actors. The waiting area smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, and every sound, the shuffle of papers, the creak of doors, seemed louder than normal. Roman strutted in wearing a blazer too sharp for a weekday morning, his hair slicked back like he'd been rehearsing in the mirror. He caught my eye and smiled the way someone does when they already think they've won. I clutched my folder tighter, every document inside feeling like armor. When our case was called, we stepped into the small courtroom. The judge, a woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, peered at us over her glasses with the expression of someone who'd seen every flavor of Neighbor Feud and was already tired. Roman started first, his lawyer doing most of the talking. They painted me as careless, inattentive, the type who probably pulled out too fast and didn't bother to check the damage. Roman nodded along dramatically, occasionally adding a sigh or shaking his head like he couldn't believe my audacity. The photos of his car were displayed on a projector, the long scuff marks exaggerated under fluorescent lighting. Then it was my turn. My hands trembled as I stood, but once I began speaking, the tremor faded into focus. I explained calmly, no fresh paint transfer, wrong height for my bumper, independent mechanic statement confirming no recent impact. I held up the photo with the ruler taped to my car, the measurement marked clearly, and placed it on the evidence stand. The judge leaned forward slightly, studying it with more attention than she had given Roman's dramatics. Jazz had organized everything into tabs, so when I introduced the screenshots, it felt seamless. Roman's Instagram posts, dated just before the alleged accident, showing his lowered suspension and cheap spacers. The judge raised an eyebrow as I read aloud his own caption, "Scraping all day, but worth it." Then I presented the shop's service notes, the ones from Discovery. I highlighted the line, "Customer states, vehicle bottomed out at speed." My voice grew steadier. This entry was dated 2 days before the night he claims I hit him. Roman's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but I wasn't done. I turned to the next page, my heartbeat in my throat, and read aloud, "Customer requests report worded as side impact." A hush rippled through the small courtroom. For the first time, Roman's confident expression faltered. He shot a glance toward the back of the room, where Sergey, the mechanic, sat waiting. When Sergey was called to testify, the air in the room seemed to thicken. He stepped up in his grease-stained work boots, clearly uncomfortable in the setting, but his voice was steady. He confirmed that Roman had brought the car in after hitting a dip at high speed, damaging the suspension and wheel well. He confirmed Roman had asked him to make the report sound like a side collision for insurance purposes. He even pulled out copies of texts Roman had sent him, one of which said, "Can you bump the estimate a bit? It'll help me with the claim." The judge's eyes narrowed, and the bailiff leaned in to pass the printed texts into evidence. Roman's face reddened. He opened his mouth as if to interject, but what came out was his own undoing. "Look, everyone does this with insurance," he blurted, waving a hand. The judge's gavel struck the bench sharply. "Mr. Roman," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "that is an admission of attempted fraud. Do you understand the seriousness of what you just stated?" The silence that followed was almost physical. I could feel the weight of it pressing down, the eyes of the court settling not on me but on him. All the weeks of whispers in the courtyard, the sidelong glances, the messages in the group chat, they felt miles away in that moment. Here, finally, it wasn't about who had the louder story. It was about facts, records, and the truth dragging itself into daylight. When the judge called a recess, Roman slumped in his chair, his earlier bravado leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. I sat back, breathing deeply, my hands finally still. The performance was over, and for once, I wasn't the one under the spotlight. When the judge came back from recess, the air in the courtroom was different. The chatter had died down. Even the shuffle of papers seemed muted. Roman sat rigid in his chair, blazer rumpled now, his jaw tight like he was chewing through his own anger. His lawyer whispered to him in short, clipped bursts, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. I just sat there, fingers laced on the table, feeling the ache in my shoulders that comes from weeks of tension. The judge spoke with deliberate calm. "Having reviewed the evidence, the court finds no liability on the part of the defendant." Her gaze cut toward Roman. "The plaintiff's claims are inconsistent with the physical evidence, with the mechanic's testimony, and with his own statements under oath." I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of my chair. Then came the line I'll never forget. "This case is dismissed. Furthermore, the court will recommend that these materials be referred to the Insurance Commission for review of potential fraud." The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot, final and undeniable. For a beat, all I heard was my own pulse rushing in my ears. Then Jazz squeezed my arm so hard I nearly laughed. Roman muttered something under his breath, but it didn't matter anymore. His story had collapsed, not because I shouted louder, but because the truth had weight when laid out piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, the morning sun felt warmer than it should have. Jazz grinned at me, holding up the folder like a trophy. "Told you. Receipts win." I laughed, shaky, half from relief, half from exhaustion. But the relief was short-lived. By that evening, the building chat was already buzzing again. Linda posted a brief message. "Turns out we were wrong. Apologies to our neighbor for the assumptions." It was polite, clipped, and quickly drowned by a wave of silence. People who had once piled on with outrage now had nothing to say. No one wanted to admit they'd believed Roman without question. Later that night, Sergey, the mechanic, knocked on my door. He looked older than he had on the stand, like the weight of testifying had taken something out of him. He handed me a small USB drive. "Recording," he said simply, "of the call when he asked me to rewrite the report. I didn't show it because the texts were enough, but you should have it." His eyes softened. "You didn't deserve what he tried to do to you. After he left, I sat with the drive in my palm, a strange mix of gratitude and unease running through me. It wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about how far someone I thought was just a cocky neighbor had been willing to go, twisting paperwork, manipulating a community, dragging me into court, all to cover his own recklessness. Just after midnight, my phone buzzed. No name, just an unknown number. The message was short, sharp. "This isn't over. We'll settle it outside court." My stomach flipped. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. For weeks, I had been dragged into his narrative, forced to defend myself. Now, even with the court behind me, he was hinting at a different kind of fight. I put the phone down and glanced toward the window, the lot outside lit by a single orange street lamp. Roman's car sat there, battered pride on 4 wheels. I closed the curtains, exhaled slowly, and told myself the same thing over and over. The worst of it was done. But deep inside, I knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night. The message sat in my phone like a live wire, daring me to touch it. Every creak of the building, every car door outside made my chest tight. I thought winning in court would end it, but I realized then that Roman didn't care about verdicts. He cared about pride, and he'd lost his in front of an audience. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let him corner me in shadows. I ordered a small set of security cameras online and spent the weekend drilling mounts above my door and pointing one at the parking lot. Jazz helped me wire them, humming under her breath like it was just another project. "He feeds on silence," she said. "So don't give him silence. Give him visibility." When the cameras went up, the group chat lit again. A couple of neighbors commented that it was a little much, but I didn't care. I posted plainly, "These cameras record everything in the lot. Consider it added security for everyone." Linda even liked the post. For once, the silence that followed felt like respect instead of suspicion. Roman, though, didn't like being on record. A week later, he stopped parking out front. Word trickled through the grapevine that his insurance company had flagged his claim and that his car had been sitting half disassembled at a salvage lot. Someone said he'd been denied coverage altogether after the court referral. He started keeping to himself. No more courtyard performances, no more smug waves. His fall from grace was quiet, but it was there. One evening, Sergey came by again. He leaned against my doorframe, smelling faintly of motor oil. "He won't come after you," he said simply. "He's lost too much. Insurance, reputation, even his ride." He paused, then added, "I've worked on cars my whole life. They don't lie. People do. But metal, rubber, paint, they tell the truth if you know how to read them." I'm glad the court listened this time. His words stuck with me longer than I expected. Life eventually slipped back into its rhythms. The chat went back to posting about lost packages and barbecue invites. Neighbors started greeting me again, tentative at first, then normal. But I wasn't the same. I'd learned how fragile reputations are, how fast a rumor can bloom into a lawsuit, how easy it is for people to nod along with the loudest voice. And I'd learned something else. The truth doesn't shout. It stacks, detail by detail, until it weighs more than any lie can hold. Some nights I still think about that first day, Roman standing by his car like an actor on stage, pointing at me with the whole courtyard as his audience. I remember how small I felt then, how badly I wanted to disappear. But now, when I pass the lot and see the faint shadow of his car's old oil stains, I don't feel small. I feel steady. The truth didn't save me quickly. It didn't save me easily, but it saved me. And when the gavel fell, when the lie cracked open under its own weight, the sound wasn't just heard in court. It echoed through every whisper, every sideways glance, every sleepless night. It said, clearly and finely, that I wasn't who he said I was. And maybe that's all justice really is. Not glory, not revenge. Just the quiet relief of knowing the story ends with the truth still standing.